G'day, Ben from Duck Playing Chicken here, and it is time to weather up this kit. So this is something that I haven't had a lot of experience with, and it could go completely pear-shaped, or it could look alright. So in preparation, I have matte coated all these pieces, so that way things like any oil washes or filtering I do actually sticks and doesn't just wipe straight off a gloss surface. So I've matte coated everything. Everything's come up really well. The decals have sort of blended in really well. And the first step I'm going to do is the chipping. So before I do any sort of filtering or washes or anything like that, I'm going to do the chipping first. And I'm going to start with the rotors, so the rotor assemblies. So it's made up of this housing, and of course there's the fan blades that go in there. Now I've already done one to give you an indication of what it looks like. So if you have a look, you can sort of see, and this is probably a bit overdone, but if I compare the clean version to the... Now keep in mind that all I've done is just some chipping on this one. And the one on the left, of course, is just the clean version. I thought I would experiment with these ones first because they're not that visible in the completed model. So I thought this was a good place to sort of start my chipping practice. See if we can get sort of really close in there so you can see that. There we go. So it's really about sort of trying to keep because this is the orientation that it goes in. So this is the bottom. So it was very much about, why is it not focusing? There we go. So it's very much about having the focus of the chipping so towards the bottom, because that's where stuff's going to get caught up in it and scratches and that sort of thing. I've also done a little bit on the fan blades. I've tried to keep that pretty subtle. And I'm hoping a bit of this will sort of blend in once I start doing the filters with oils. And this is the top cap that holds it sort of all together. So how did I go about doing it? I simply used some kitchen sponge, just tore off a piece. Used some clamping tweezers, so this technique's nothing new, and just dabbed it in the paint and did it very gently. So I've used two colours. I've used the Vallejo chipping brown. This is a fantastic colour for sort of doing chipping, and I've also used some dark grey green. So they're the two colours that I've used. So what I've done is I've just put a bit of paint. I use just a ceramic tile, and I literally dab it in the paint, the sponge, and then I'll just try and get as much of the excess off as possible. And then I'll go around the edges and just very, very gently. You don't need to go overboard like I did with the other one. Really about sort of concentrating it in the areas where the most damage would occur. Try and keep this in focus for you. You also have to consider the direction of the chips or the scratches. So this pivots that way, so you're likely to get some sort of vertical, chips and scratching of where bits of debris have sort of got caught in there. I think once I put a filter over it, I think some of this will probably not be as stark, which is what I want. I want to sort of make it a little bit more subtle. I'm happy with the size of the chips, but I think yeah, they may be a little bit too contrasty against the light grey. And of course there'd be lots of debris sort of thrown up into the into the fan blades. Just got to try and imagine where there might be a build-up of debris getting caught in it and causing chips. I think that's about as far as I'll go on that one. I'll just we'll compare it with the other one. The other one I think I've gone maybe a little bit overboard with, so I might try and keep this one maybe a little bit more subtle. So that's what we've got. A bit messy underneath, but again, once I put some filters over it, it'll tone it back a little bit, I think. The other thing I want to do is sort of get a bit of directional scratching on the inside. So it didn't really work that well on the other one. I'm hoping I can get something at least. It doesn't have to be too obvious because it's hardly going to be seen. But when you think about it, if there's a bit of stuff that gets caught in the fan, it's going to create some scratches sort of around the inside of the housing. There. Now the next thing I'm going to do is take the dark grey and essentially do the same thing. Now this dark grey is going to look really subtle because it is quite close to the colour of the fan housing. It just adds, yeah, a different sort of level of chipping. The chipping brown has obviously gone right back to sort of the metal, whereas the grey is maybe just a thin layer of paint taken off. There we go, and looks suitably dirtied up. I'm going to repeat the process for the for the green armor pieces, and of course for these armor pieces most of the chipping is going to happen sort of at the bottom. You would expect that yeah, most of the damage is going to happen around the mouth and probably towards the bottom of this piece. The other thing is where there's little indentations, I intend to use a bit of a rust, dribble a bit of rust down from those as well, because that's probably where water would collect. I'm going to try and make it sort of asymmetrical if I can. You obviously don't want to have completely symmetrical weathering. Looks like it's seen a little bit of action. And again, when you look at it, the back piece probably isn't going to get a lot of chips on it. Now this is the back. This is the back piece, so I might even reduce the amount of chips this has when you think about it, because the front would probably cop most of the damage. There wouldn't be as much sort of weathering. One thing I'm doing here though is I've got a bit of silvering on those decals, so I'm going to use a bit of chipping to cover that up. Not quite sure what happened there. Some of them worked really well and others I got a bit of silvering in there. Okay. How weathered that's going to be. Okay, on top of the chipping that I've done, I wanted to get a little bit of brown in there, just a little bit of, a hint of dust and mud and that sort of thing. So just here, over the top of the chips. So this is sort of more recent weathering that's occurred. And what I'm using for this is this, it's actually called Rain Marks, but it's from Vallejo. It's one of their environment acrylic products. I thought I was going to use oils, but I did a bit of an experiment and it wasn't working the way I wanted it to, so I've ended up using this stuff. And what I do is essentially just, here's one I haven't done. So I'm literally just getting a bit on the brush, and I'm actually wiping off all the excess on a paper towel, and I'm sort of just going in there and just dabbing it on. Not being really particularly careful about it. Just randomly sort of putting it on and go over it again, and then just using my finger just to knock it back a bit. And then you can see I've sort of got some tide marks in there, so what I'm going to do is just go in with a bit of water, knock it back a little bit. The other thing I can do is use a cotton bud, just damp it down with water. I just sort of stipple it to break it up a little bit. And we have some dried mud, bit of dust on the bottom of the fan assemblies. So they're both looking good and weathered now. I've actually gone ahead and done a similar thing on the front and back housings. I've just put, so it's a bit of an indication of sort of dried mud or dust. It's been kicked up, just sitting on top of all the chipping. There we go, sort of all dirtied up now. Helps to break up the green a little bit too, so that it's not all sort of the exactly the same colour of green. Of course, this being a military vehicle, it would be out in the field. And this is probably the first time you've seen it sort of, most of it assembled. So I've done a lot of the chipping and a little bit of the sort of dried mud, dirt kicked up on it. Try not to go overboard. Which probably on the front and the back it probably does look a bit much, but that's alright, they'll be covered up. But everything else is probably a bit more subtle and more the way I like it. But I don't want this thing completely covered in mud or anything like that. I just want it to, look as though it's been out in the field for a bit. Hasn't come in for a service for a bit of time. So this rust texture, again from Vallejo. And I'm going to use that, try and be really subtle with it. It's very easy to sort of go overboard with this weathering stuff, but I'm going to try and so just in the areas where, say for example, around where the number plate sort of joins the top here, there's just a little bit of rust maybe. Vallejo thinner, just to thin this down a bit and streak it a little bit. So I'm literally just sort of dabbing it on. Where I need to, I'll just use a little bit of acrylic thinner just to water it down a little bit. And so now it looks sort of more like rust stains. Again, I don't really want it going overboard. I want to put a little bit sort of just around these tiny holes here. Then what I can do is get some get some thinner, and have this stuff sort of streak down a little bit. You see, I'm trying to just keep it really subtle. It's coming out probably a bit more contrasty on the camera than what it is in real life. Alright, well, it's looking proper dirty now. Proper dirty. So this is a classic case where you would get water build up in the shrouding around the light, and it would of course build up sort of down towards the bottom of it, and then you'd have a little bit of streaking happening. Okay, so on the actual vehicle itself, we get some very small sort of rust spots. And again, I really don't want to go overboard with it. This is a functioning piece of machinery. It's not something that's going to be just sitting out in the paddock. So I think the last thing I'm going to sort of do is maybe just a little bit of soot around these vents. So I'm going to use, I'm sure it's called oil stain, but I'm going to use one of these Tamiya weathering powders. So this is set D. Probably not really coming out that well on camera. Now I won't be throwing another matte coat over any of this. I really don't think it's going to be necessary. This isn't going to be a model that's going to be handled regularly, so I think it'll be fine. Might use a little bit on the seats. Alright, so the next step is for me to basically insert these fan assemblies and to finally glue this in place. Now there is a front and a back to these things. I don't think anyone's really going to notice if I get it the wrong way around, but I might as well, while I'm assembling it, get it the right way around. Okay, so we've got the back one here. I'll just check the orientation of that, of the fan. Yes, that looks like the back one. There we go. It's now in. It spins freely in there. Now it's just a matter of getting sort of a bit of glue in there and just sealing that up finally. Let's get the other one in. There we go. So that spins freely. The fan does actually spin as well, but not that you're ever going to be needing to do that. So I'm going to get them glued up, And there's going to be a couple of things that I still have to do. I have to put the canopy on. That's kind of the last thing I want to do, just because it's going to be quite delicate. So I have to put the these around these, I don't know what are they, like guards or something. Put them on as well, but that'll be the last thing along with the canopy to do, just because it's going to be so delicate. I've also got the two external mirrors that go on the front here, so all the delicate bits to stick on, I've sort of left them to last because I know otherwise I'm going to knock them off. But yeah, getting there. There might be some final pigment powder I use at just on the feet of the craft, just to sort of dirty them up a bit. But I think we're nearly there. Nearly there. So I'm going to glue these up and I'll be back in a tick. Very close to finishing now. I've got the WAPPA all together, and I have to say this is one of the most fiddly kits I've ever put together, especially this gun and these two mirrors here. They keep coming off, so it is really fiddly. You have to be really careful. So I'll show you sort of some of the full fix of the weathering. I'm pretty happy with the way it's come out. So the two fan assemblies have a lot more weathering on them, because they're going to be copying a lot more of the, you know, turbulence and debris getting caught up in them, whereas the rest of it's, you know, a bit more subtle. So I'm pretty happy with that. The last step that I want to do is use some pigments, some weathering powder. So I'm just going to use this Vallejo natural umber. Give it a bit of a shake. I'm going to use a light brush, a soft brush, and I'm also going to use a bit of pigment binder, and that's going to be around the feet on this thing. So I've put the paper down because this stuff makes a hell of a mess, so I want to try and contain it as much as I can. So I'm going to get a little bit on the brush, try and brush off as much of the excess as I can without making a mess. And I'm going to start with the foot wells and just sort of lightly brushing them on there, because that's where you get sort of a bit of a build-up of dust and dirt. Also on the pedals, you know, where you're likely to get sort of the most foot traffic. And think of this in terms of it's sort of dried mud that's sort of become almost dust. You can sort of see how that's working on the footwells. A bit less on this side, so I'm going to try and balance it up a little bit. You put a little bit on the upper legs, because that's probably where you get a little bit of dust sort of kicked up. But the bulk of this is actually going to go on the feet. Now, just a word of warning, if you're using pigments and then you decide to seal it with airbrush will blow off most of the pigment, so you got to be sort of conscious of that. I'm not going to be putting another coat of matte down on this. I'm going to leave it as it is. It's certainly not going to be handled that much once it's on display, simply because it is super fragile. I have literally lost count how many times I have had to glue the mirrors back on. So I think, like I said earlier on, this is not a model for the faint-hearted, that's for sure. Don't get me wrong, it's a very well engineered kit. The fit is reasonably good. I did have some issues with getting the mirrors in the holes, the matching holes that they've got. I think they're a little bit small, so I had to drill them out a bit. But you know, overall the engineering of this kit is pretty good. It's everything lines up pretty well. Of course, I've noticed a couple of things after I painted it and I finished it. I've noticed a couple of things that I should have done. So there's a couple of seams that I didn't really deal with properly, and if I bring it up to the camera I can try and show you. It's just down near the, look through there, just at the bottom of the control stick. So just in here. Very hard to see, but there's a seam I should have cleaned up there. Also on the top of these legs, see if I can make it. There's actually a mold line on the top of the struts that hold the legs, and I should have cleaned them up, but I didn't. So you know, it happens. So I'm just using a little bit of pigment powder just to tie everything sort of together as far as the you know, the environment that it's been in. It also helps to matte down some of the sort of more shiny metal bits. The good thing about this pigment powder is you can, you know, if you go a bit overboard, you can knock it back. You just brush more of it off. Alright, so now I'm going to try and do something a little bit heavier just around the pads of the feet. So I'm going to use the binder. I'm not sure what this stuff is. It's you know, some sort of glue or something like that. I'm just getting a little bit around the feet here, so that when I get the pigment on there, it's going to sort of clump up and stick. So I'm just sprinkling it on. I don't want it to lose its sort of dirt texture. So I'm just sprinkling the pigment on. I'm not actually brushing it on, because as soon as you do that, it sort of becomes more like paint. And of course we want to maintain some of that sort of mud or dried on dirt texture. Dried on dirt, dried on mud, I mean. Okay, do the same thing on the other side. Now I can't remember, I'm pretty sure this binder dries reasonably matte. I don't think it dries glossy if I remember rightly. Okay, so let's see if we can... Yeah, it's probably a bit hard to see, but it is like clumped mud. It's come up reasonably well. And of course now I'm going to just do the covers. So I'm going to brush on just a bit of dirt. Again, it's just about tying it all together so it looks consistent. I mean, it's not too detailed in there, it doesn't really need to be, it's not going to be seen that much. There you can see that's sort of really coming up pretty well. The key is, from everything I've sort of read online, and people who are certainly a lot better at this stuff than I am, it's all about subtle layering. You don't want to sort of do all your weathering in one hit. You want to build it up in small layers. So that decal, that had all sorts of silvering and stuff on it, but now that really looks as though that's painted on and it's been battered around a bit. I'm just so hesitant to sort of touch this touch this thing. It's so fragile. But it just does look very cool once it's all sort of put together, and certainly throwing figures on it is going to help sort of put it in scale. So I'm not going to clamp them right down, I don't think. No. So there we go. Alright. There we have a fully weathered WAPPA. And at 1/35th scale, it's quite a large vehicle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the Jeep that I did. So this is from the same series and also on 1/35th scale. But just so you get an idea of, you know, for a one-person vehicle, this thing's quite large. So here I have the Jeep from another kit, and at the moment it doesn't have the seats in it, so I'm still painting up the figures. But you can see this is sort of a four-person vehicle. It's a small Jeep, or a small, you know, passenger vehicle. It's not large, but you know, when you compare it, you compare the size of this thing carries four people. This one carries one. So yeah, it's quite a large vehicle at that scale, but it's certainly really impressive. So the next step for me, of course, is to paint up the figures, which is again something that I'm not particularly good at, but it will be the feature of the next video. So I'll talk about some of the methods I use when painting 1/35th scale figures and some of the sort of cheats that I do. But yeah, so in that next video I'll be doing the figures and also have the beauty shots of this thing all together with the figures. But at least you get sort of an idea of what it's looking like. And so far I'm pretty pleased with the way it's come up. I think you know, it's I've weathered this a lot better than, say, I've weathered this thing, which is sort of really over the top with the pigment powder and what have you. So I think I am kind of learning, and I think, yeah, just try to keep it really subtle. That's what makes all the difference. So on that note, I will catch you at the next video. See you later.